All right, welcome everybody. My name is Eric Ritchie. I'm with the customer engagement team here at the Reality Solutions Group at Autodesk. With us today, we have George Hatch. She's going to be telling us all about capturing stockpiles with ReCap 360 and then doing some, volume measurements and all of that in Civil 3D. As you may see, this session is being recorded. We'll be posting this on our YouTube channel, maybe later this week, early next week. During the course of the session, if you have any questions, feel free. You can use the Ask a Question widget on GoToWebinar. You can see here, just if you have a question, type it in. We'll have some time for question and answer at the end of the session. If it's pertinent, we can certainly jump in and ask questions during the session as well. Also, I'll direct you to recap.community@autodesk.com. That's you can use that email address to reach out to us. We're always interested in feedback. If you have, additional questions, if you have, additional topics you'd like to see us cover, feel free to reach out. We love to hear from you guys. We're doing this for you guys, for our users. Anything we can do to make the experience better for you guys, feel free to let us know. And with that, I will hand it over to George. Welcome, George.
Thank you so much, Eric. Frankly, this is kind of an exciting topic, especially as we're rolling into the winter. Typically when people talk about stock piles, they're talking about sand or gravel pit stockpiles, but I've actually been doing some recent work with Delaware DOT and taking this similar workflow that I'm going to walk through today and applying it to tracking their salt volumes. So all of us up here in the north that are having to deal with salt volumes, tracking those volumes, this is absolutely an applicable conversation to be having. So on our agenda today is to be, first of all, we're going to talk about, why do volumes even matter? Why do we care about calculating the volumes, and why does it matter if they're accurate? We're going to talk about kind of yesterday's calculation methods, or even today's calculation methods for some of you on the phone. This process has not changed for you over the years, and we're going to hopefully show you some new tools, some new solutions that are going to help you more accurately predict or more accurately analyze your volumes and your stockpiles. And then we're going to talk about how to get started with some of these newer solutions. And then eventually getting all the data into Civil 3D. What does that look like? How do I then calculate volumes from there? So with the first topic to cover being, why do volumes matter? Honestly, volumes are going to matter for our stockpiles, no matter what the stockpiles are, first and foremost for accounting purposes. Over the years, this has just been a very manual task, and we'll talk about how we're calculating those volumes in a little bit. But that manual task has just been a necessity for accounting. Really, owners, operators need to understand what they have for volume in those stockpiles for many different financial reasons. But also, we want the ability to track usage. Analyze trends when we're low, when we're high, and see if that corresponds with other events. Of course, when we talk about salt volumes or salt storage, of course, it's probably going to have a lot to do with, of course, the weather outside. But if we can tie the volumes of our salt sheds, for instance, to the amount of snowfall or the duration of a storm, we can more accurately predict likely what we'll use in the next storm based on the weather forecast. we also use these volumes to track usage to plan more effectively. Again, to predict and then minimize risk of material shortage. In fact, the Delaware Online published an article that said after exhausting their supplies of road salt last year, coming close, businesses and cities in the region are stockpiling extra in case of another super snowy season. And that was actually an article posted earlier this year. And as most of you know, here in the Northeast, I happen to live in Massachusetts, we are getting quite a bit of snow. So their predictions were accurate. And understanding those volumes is, of course, going to be important. So yesterday's solutions, really when we talk about yesterday's solutions, the number one most common way that people are predicting volumes or calculating volumes is by eye. They're walking out to their stockpiles, they're walking out to their salt sheds, and they're just looking at the pile and making this educated guess based on past experience. Of course, there's some accuracy issues with that approach. We'll talk about that. Another way is to take the period volume approach, where it's a series of calculating the angle, the width of the top of your stockpile, the radius of the bottom, and then the height, and using these values to come up with an approximate volume. And of course, that volume is very approximate because you're going to have large lumps in some areas where you may have valleys in others. And frankly, it's not very common to see a single stockpile that has just one peak like that. So you have to use kind of a combination. Also, there's the traditional survey method. And this is what I think most municipalities, most companies that need to track their volumes are using today. They have land surveyors on staff that have the equipment, and it's really just a process of walking up and down, or I would like to say gracefully falling up and down these stockpiles. For those of you that have ever had to do this, you know that walking up and down these big gravel hills is not exactly the easiest feat in the world. So you can use, of course, traditional survey methods, but there's some drawbacks to that as well. So I was recently down in Delaware, as I mentioned earlier, and they're using this method along with some others, the traditional survey method, where they've literally just marked out lines on their salt shed walls. This is, of course, applicable only if you have indoor facilities for some of your stockpiles. And if the height of the pile is at a certain line, then you have an approximate volume of X amount, whatever that is. But as you can see here, that just in this picture alone, of course, the size of this salt pile goes much higher than the line, and then we have massive sections that are under the line. So it's again, it's not an accurate process. And we have the educated guess. And really, what's the problem with all of these methods? It's accuracy. And accuracy is, again, important because, remember, we're tying the volumes that come out of this process to planning initiatives. We're tying it to accounting initiatives. We want to make sure that we're getting paid for all of the materials that we're actually sending out to the field, wherever that may be. So, of course, when anything is tied to money, it's more important to all of us, especially at a government level. So what are some of the solutions that we're using today? Today's solutions really start with laser scanning. we take this traditional process of surveying, and in comes the event of laser scanning and affordable laser scanning in many instances. We have companies across the country that are purchasing these scanners, and they're, of course, extremely accurate, and they don't take too long to set up, depending on the unit that you get, whether you go with a Faro and a truly targetless process, or whether you're using something else. This laser scanning solution really can make a lot of sense. There's some drawbacks, however. When you need to set up your laser scanner, of course, that takes some time. You've got to determine exactly where to set that scanner up, and you've got to have a line of sight access to the entire pile, which means that if you've got very high piles, to be able to shoot the top of that is maybe going to be a challenge. So there are challenges. It's not impossible, but it's definitely something to consider. We have, of course, another solution, and this is the solution that I'm going to be talking to you about today. I find that this idea of creating photos to a model or a point cloud is really the ideal solution for this process of calculating volumes. So if you were to imagine, you take a bunch of pictures with whatever device you choose, and maybe you mount it on a very large pole, or maybe you even mount it to a drone and get it elevated off the ground. Now we've got a very inexpensive solution to getting out there and getting photos of those stockpiles, and then creating truly realistic 3D point clouds. Of course, if any of you have been on these webcasts before, this is not really a new conversation for you. You've seen ReCap 360, you've seen the tools inside of ReCap, you understand our Autodesk reality solutions, our reality capture solutions, but if you have not, and this is the first time you're seeing it, we do have these tools called ReCap 360 for creating point clouds from photos. So what does that look like? Well, first of all, Autodesk ReCap 360 services, of course, we start with photos. The photos can be coming from your phone. They can come from a GoPro Hero 3 Plus Edition or 4. They can also come from maybe a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. The idea is, of course, the better quality your images are, the better your model is going to be in the very end. I'll talk to you about some of my personal settings that I like to configure on my devices. We take those photos and we bring them into ReCap 360. ReCap 360 then processes the photos, and through some magic in the cloud, we end up with an actual point cloud or mesh. That point cloud or mesh can then, of course, be brought into any of our hero products, whether it's Navisworks or Civil3D or Revit or AutoCAD. Maybe it's Map or Inventor or 3ds Max. Whatever the flavor of your next step in design, we can bring that point cloud data directly into our hero solutions. And when you think about it, we can also bring in these very large meshes. They can be extremely large, especially if we're talking about acres worth of stockpile data into Project Memento, which is a Autodesk Labs product right now, and I believe, and it is a tool that allows us to make edits and export large meshes to maybe a 3D printer to do a scale model, scale 3D print of this object, whatever it may be. Now, I mean, as cool as it would be to have a 3D printed stockpile in my office, I'm not sure that I I would choose to do that, but you of course have the option to if you want. So when we talk about, these point clouds, the suite of products that can actually absorb or digest these point clouds from ReCap is growing. Now, when you look at the product line between 2013 products and actually 2015, I should say 2015, not 2014, you'll see that we have a very distinct change in the ability to process these point clouds and visualize them inside those hero products. From 2013, we were dealing with something that was more black and white. We could only process about 2 billion points. 2014 and on, we can now process 20 billion plus points. Of course, that's a lot of points, but frankly, the amount of projects that I'm seeing that come in with billions and billions and billions of points is increasing. We've got laser scanners out there that can get high accuracy data, or we use this point cloud from photos approach. We get high accuracy data with lots of points, and the good news is that the hero products listed here, like AutoCAD, Navisworks, Revit, Inventor, or Civil3D, can all process those point clouds because the ReCap engine resides in them. The ReCap engine is really just the tool that reads our ReCap point clouds, and it resides in each of these different products. And you'll see live how that works. So what cameras do I use? Really, it comes down to two different types. There's many different types of cameras, but I'm going to talk about two. There's DSLR and then mirrorless cameras. I am going to group them together for the purpose of this presentation. Keep in mind that DSLR and mirrorless cameras are different in many ways, but it comes down to the accuracy of those cameras and how they operate for me. Those of you that love DSLR cameras will absolutely disagree that they can be compared, but we'll move on. The strength for this group, DSLR or mirrorless, is that they have very high resolution and then zoom capabilities, among many other things. So you can set auto fade and things like that on the images themselves. The other approach would be to use a GoPro or a wide-angle fisheye camera. Some of the strengths there are that it's a small device. It's a physically small camera, which means that I can travel with it a little easier if it's in my pocket. When I'm out in the field, it's not as susceptible to the weather. I can put it in an enclosure and still do my job. I can also put it closer to my target. So if I'm dealing with a very confined space, then I can actually use that GoPro inside of a building, for instance, like those salt sheds. And then less image coverage. What I mean by that is that because I've got this fisheye, I can take, I found about 3/4 of the photos than I would have had to with a DSLR or mirrorless, because I don't have the overlap that I need for my photos. So really, it comes down to these two different solutions being good in one area and not so good in another. The DSLR and mirrorless are better for small objects with plenty of room to take the pictures. And then the GoPro or wide-angle fisheye type of camera I found is better for large objects in tight spaces. So when you need to be a little closer to your subject, then of course a traditional camera is going to be able to pick up. So how do we get started? Getting started configuring your GoPro, that's the approach I'm going to take today, is pretty simple. Frankly, you just need to set your GoPro up so that you're taking pictures about every 2 seconds, because we're going to be walking around this object, and we want it just to take pictures on its own about every 2 seconds. The idea is that you want enough coverage that all of the images overlap within a significant amount. And you'll see from some of the samples what I mean by that. We also want to set the resolution for 1080p and 12 megapixels or larger. If you can go to 1440, then great on video. If you can go higher than 12 megapixels, then fantastic. The idea is the more pixels, the better in this case. So the highest resolution possible is likely going to be your best solution. Next, we're going to take our shot. Frankly, it's pretty simple. Once those settings are in your camera, then we're going to take our shot. Now, keep in mind, the approach that I'm going to use here does not use a UAV or a drone or a quadcopter. Frankly, I love drones. I fly them with my 6-year-old. We were big into that hobby. And it's a practical tool for this purpose. However, because the FAA is kind of cracking down on a lot of the commercial use of these drones, instead of showing you a process where a drone is required, I wanted to make sure I show you a process where you don't need a drone. What I did for these stockpiles was I literally took, as you can see, my GoPro and mounted it to about a 25-foot pole. If you can get a taller pole and you can hold it up, then do it. The higher you get your camera over your stockpile, the better. The idea is that you want to get as much of that stockpile into each picture as you possibly can. The other thing that you want to do before you set up all of before you take these pictures is that you want to put objects, like here, you can see that I put 2 cones next to the stockpile exactly 40 feet apart from each other. So that way I can measure that distance. I know I have a known distance in my stockpile. I've seen others maybe throw a yardstick up, or they've got known survey points and you can put in the coordinates. But for our purposes, we really only care about the volumes. I don't care about the geolocation of the stockpile. So the cones work great for me. Maxed out the tape measure, set that apparently I had a 40-foot tape that day, set those cones at 40 feet, and we're done. Now it's a process of taking the pictures. Typically, what I'll do is I'll take pictures all around the stockpile in this case, letting it take a picture every 2 seconds as I walk around with this pole up in the air. And then I'll move closer to the stockpile and walk around it a second time. You don't have to walk at a snail's pace. If you want to walk a little faster or a little slower, just increase or decrease the frequency of your pictures on the GoPro. But the idea is that you get enough coverage around that stockpile that all of the pictures overlap, as I discussed before. And you get enough angles that we can see line of sight into every nook and cranny of that stockpile. Now, it's convenient that the stockpile was just tall enough that I could make it work with the pole that I had. But if you have stockpiles that are larger, use the same approach and just walk up on the stockpile or walk up maybe 5 feet. Frankly, it's a lot easier than doing a survey of the entire stockpile, even still. And once you're done with taking your pictures, you're done on the site. Everything's finished, and now we can head back to the office. Or, better yet, load them in the car while I warm up and get a hot cocoa. So, uploading our photos to ReCap 360. Pretty simple process. You go to recap360.autodesk.com, start a brand new project. As you can see here, I've configured it so that I am in feet units. Then we're going to drag and drop from Windows Explorer all of those photos that we took out in the field. You can set this project up to be draft quality, as I would say, or we can go full res right off the bat. But once I have all of these photos uploaded, you'll see that now I can go through and register that known distance. This is just going to take some time for you to play with and get comfortable with. It's frankly, they're pretty simple tools to be able to snap to pixels in the image. And then as long as you have matched those known points in about 3 or more images, then I found that you're good to go. The second that you have those known points and you're registered, then we finalize the ReCap project. Once the ReCap project is finalized, it's submitted, and then we wait. And we're going to end up receiving an email, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But as you can see, the process of from taking your photos, setting up your camera, to taking your photos, to loading this in the cloud, honestly, the slowest part is going to be taking the photos. And I mean slow by, maybe about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, depending on the size of the pile. If it's an indoor salt shed, like you saw in some of those previous images, then maybe it's going to take you a little bit longer. In fact, I've been configuring a track system inside of a salt shed so that we can just mount the GoPro to the rafters, and it will run down the rafters of the salt shed, return, and then I just run 3 or 4 passes at different angles and gather the pictures that way. And that's automated, of course, if you're going to do it that way. But if you're going to walk up on the piles, just take your pictures and then upload them. We're talking about an entire process from start to finish of, I would say, no more than an hour. Of course, the accuracy is going to be much better than if we were to use the, my guesstimation tools like my, rule of thumb, or if I were to use any of the other traditional volume tools. But it's also going to take a lot less time than a traditional survey or even a laser scan. From here, it's pretty much the same process. We get an email, we're notified that, okay, your point cloud is finished, and we download the RCS file. Now, the ReCap point cloud file in RCS is then converted to a project, a ReCap project. You can kind of think of it as, an AutoCAD drawing with attachment, if you will. If you need to, you can configure the setup of this project, but really the next step is to just clean up the point cloud. By clean up the point cloud, now I'm kind of just referring to removing excess points that aren't needed. And there's a lot more detail that we can get into as far as how or why you'd want to clean up, quote unquote, a point cloud. But from there, you then just import directly into Civil3D the RCP file itself. Or as you can see here, I'm exporting a cleaned up individual RCS file. Now, the file extensions honestly don't really matter for those of you on the call that are curious about what is what. The bottom line is I've taken a model created for photos that's to scale, and now I'm going to be importing that model into a tool like Civil3D. In this case, it is Civil3D for volumes, to be able to create my volume analysis. Okay, so on the Civil3D side, it is, again, pretty simple process where I take the RCS file that is now clean and import it as an attachment. This works similar to XREFs. And then I'm going to use the point cloud extraction tool that comes with your subscription. If you're not on subscription, then honestly, you probably should be, because this is one of those benefits to subscription. But once I've used this tool, it's going to create a Civil3D tin surface. And as you can see here, that tin surface is extremely accurate. In fact, it used every single point in the cloud, in this case, to create a surface. If you wanted to, you could simplify that surface in a bunch of different ways, but we chose not to here. Next, I can run elevation banding analysis, maybe on the point cloud or just on the surface. You can do that in multiple different ways. And then finally, the step to create a base surface. What am I comparing my surface of my stockpile to? Well, what I do is I just draw a spline all the way around the base of that stockpile, create a surface from that spline that is now set to the elevation of the base of that stockpile. So now I've got a flat surface on the bottom, and of course a comparison surface that is my stockpile. And now we create a tin volume. We're literally going to get a tin volume between that base and the point cloud created from photos within about 2 to 3 minutes, depending on how fast it takes you to create those surfaces. But what comes out, of course, is now a volume comparison that shows us, in this case, I've got 466 cubic yards of fill in this stockpile itself. That took minutes to actually accomplish in real time. Now I'm going to do this live. I'm going to do a couple of things live, just so those of you on the call can actually see the products themselves. I want to talk through some of my my process, but hopefully you're seeing that this is not rocket science, and it's definitely something that everybody here can accomplish from photos to models. Okay, so I'm going to jump out of Civil3D, or out of my PowerPoint. Nobody wants PowerPoint for that long. And let's jump into ReCap. I'm going to skip the submission process. Hopefully you saw the submission process and it made sense to you. But let's assume that we're starting from download of the ReCap point file. If you need to know more about that, there's many as far as creating the point cloud in ReCap 360. There's many tutorials on how to do that, and we can get them to you. But for now, I'm just going to create a new project. I'm going to name that project, and then I'm going to import a RCS file that was downloaded earlier today. So this RCS file is that point cloud that was generated from ReCap 360. And as you can see, ReCap is now brought that RCS in, and I can start making edits. I just want to talk about some of the edits that you can make here because it's important for those that have never seen ReCap to understand exactly what the process can be inside of ReCap and then to Civil3D. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll highlight my project area that I care about, and we're going to clip the outside, and basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to then highlight with a crossing window all of these points, and we're going to set them in a new region, call it File, and Clear, and I'm going to unclip all of my other data that I had removed. Now I've got these scanned regions. One's called File. If I turn that off, it leaves everything else. What I like to usually do is highlight all that data, and I'm going to put that in a new region and call it Everything Else. So there we go. Now I've got two regions, Everything Else and my file. The file is really all I care about. And you'll see why I did that in a moment. Next, I'm going to just save that RCP file, and the RCP file, remember, is called New Project. Okay, So that's really all I needed to do. I can go in and make a bunch more changes if I want to this RCP file and clean up other things, maybe, you know, remove these cones that were added there. But you can see that the accuracy of the RCP file is pretty incredible, frankly, from photos. And now we're going to bring that into Civil3D. So I'm going to start up Civil3D from scratch, and we're going to do this all live so you can see it's a simple process. Of course, if we do it live, we got to wait for a moment while I start up my Civil3D here. The first thing that you're going to want to do is, of course, start with a template. I start with a template that I use all the time, set to feet and a local coordinate zone. And then I'm going to go to the Insert tab and attach one of these projects. Notice that new project RCP was created today at 2:36, so 1 minute ago. I'm going to import that point cloud, and you'll notice that right away I've got a couple of things going on. First of all, I'm going to save this file so that we have it, and we're going to call this demo. And I'm going to select the point cloud and just take note that if I go to my point cloud manager, I actually have those regions that I created here, which means that if I want to, I can turn them on and turn them off all right here from this dialog box. What's also very handy about the point clouds inside of Civil3D, and this is only true if it's a ReCap point cloud. Those of you using competing products for ReCap Pro, if you're doing other types of laser scanning, maybe you're using a Leica unit and you're using Cyclone, or you're using Scene, or you're using whatever other registration tool there is out there, and you try to do the same approach, not putting that point cloud through ReCap first, you will have very different expected results. Point clouds typically do not process very well inside of any of our design applications unless they've been processed through ReCap. Now, conveniently, we can process all the point cloud formats that you need to. So if you need to continue using a product like Cyclone, where you can, of course, then create your point cloud, bring it through ReCap, and then it's ready to come into Civil3D or AutoCAD or whatever. I also have the ability to create my own cropping as well here. Now, something that I always like to show is that these cropping tools are based on your perspective view. So if I were to make two crops, you'll notice that now I've got a circular crop. Now, technically, I cropped through the side of the stockpile, which means that now that, of course, looks very different than it did before, because it was cropping based on my perspective view. And it's just something good to know. Next, I'm going to use the subscription extension tool called Point Cloud Surface Extraction, and I'm going to just execute that tool, select the surface, and go in here. Let's just call this sand pile. I'm going to set it to a no border and hit next. I don't want the entire point cloud, so you know what? I'm just going to create a sample area. Whoops, there we go. A sample area about here to here. Now, once it's selected that surface sample area, there's filter methods. In this case, do not apply a filter to stockpiles. I'll write something up as to exactly why that is, but just trust me for now. Don't apply a filter, the planar or the curving interpolation filter. Use no filter and say create surface. Now this is processing hundreds of thousands of points right now. We're not talking about billions of points. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of points because this isn't very large. But it's processing all those points and putting those points into a surface. Now, what's important to know is that if I look at that surface that's been created, right now I have 799,000 points in the surface. And if I wanted to, what I could do is go down here, run an edit, and simplify that surface. Now, what I may or may not choose to actually let this execute just because it takes about a minute or two, and I hate to watch it. But I can process out these points and say, you know what, I'm okay with a maximum elevation change of more than anything less than 0.025 feet. Remember, these point clouds have been generated from the photos, but the accuracy I found is within 0.06 closure of traditional survey methods. And if you're taking a survey, a traditional survey of a stockpile, you've only got shots every, I don't know, a grid of every 3 meters or 4 meters or worse. So I'm typically okay with removing some of these points just for the purpose of the processing. And you can see down here that command is still working. It is simplifying the surface, and what it's doing is it is removing individual points from that surface, assuming that by removing the point, it does not change the elevation of the combined area of that surface by 0.025 feet. So that takes some time, of course, to analyze all 799,000 points that happen to be in that surface. But once this is done, we're going to have a lot less points because likely many of them were not required for our purposes, which means that I'm going to be able to then manipulate and use the surface a little bit more efficiently inside of my DWG. As you can see, it takes a moment for that to complete. Now let's just take a look at my surface statistics again. Oh, look at this. We've got now only 400,000 cubic, 400,000 points inside of this surface, which means that, you know, we really basically cut it in half, which means that I have twice the efficiency in my model. It's all about best practices with any tool, and that is my recommended best practice with these surfaces. So now we've got a surface, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this point cloud. If you go up here, you can select it and then change the level of detail. That's going to basically remove or from your view a lot of points. Now, you should know that as I zoom in and out, that level of detail will increase or decrease. But I can go in here, I can change not just the level of detail, but I can change the point size. The point size in this case really isn't something that I care about. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reduce this level of detail after I change my spectrum. Basically, I want to see elevation bandings. Let's say apply there. And I can change the elevations here as well. So let's say that I want to start there at -2. Let's go every 2 feet. I hit apply. That looks good to me. The next step is typically that I draw that spline I was talking about. So I'm just going to draw a spline around the base of where the stockpile is. And let's set that resolution down a bit, adjust the spline, and I'm going to polyline edit it, and we create a polyline, of course. And what's really cool about this is now I can go in and create a feature line from that polyline here and assign it to my sand file elevations. So now I've got a feature line that is exactly at the existing grade of the point cloud of that stockpile. And if I were to create a brand new surface, let's call it existing grade, and say OK, and OK. Now I can go in here, create a comparison surface that is a tin volume surface, and now I'm going to have a comparison for existing to my sand pile, and that is exactly what we use for my volumes. If I need a cut or a fill factor, I can, of course, apply that here. We're going to just call this comparison and let Civil3D do its magic. So it's going to then do a comparison volume surface. That will take a moment or so for this, this particular stockpile. You should know that I've done this for much larger stockpiles, and it really doesn't take that much longer, maybe another 3 seconds, 5 seconds to create that surface. But now I can look at my statistics for my comparison surface, and here are my volumes. I've got 444.6 cubic yards of fill in this stockpile. And this stockpile, if I need it based on tonnage, I can just take the standard weight, of course, of that material by cubic yard, multiply it, and I get my tonnage. So hopefully this really explains, kind of in a little bit more detail than you've seen in the past, how to create surface volumes from point cloud. I'm going to jump back into my PowerPoint and kind of wrap this up. The bottom line here is that it's really as simple as 1, 2, 3. We've got photos that you're going to take using the method that I described earlier. Those photos then get uploaded to ReCap 360, which produces your point cloud. And that point cloud can be brought into ReCap and cleaned up and analyzed as you see fit. And we're going to bring that data back into Civil3D for volume comparison. Maybe we need to create volume tables. And we can track all of that data inside of Civil3D for the life cycle of the stockpile. So I can then compare the volumes created or the surface created this month to the volume or surface created next month and get my difference as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Eric, because I think, Eric, you want to just kind of touch base about Real 2015, and then we can open it up for some questions.
Yeah, thanks, George. That's great as always. As George said, I just wanted to take a moment before we jump into the questions to talk about Real 2015. We're going to be holding a conference in San Francisco at the end of February, 25th through the 27th. We're describing it as where the sensors meet the makers. The idea is that we're going to be covering all things reality computing, everything from techniques like this, capturing the real world, processing something, making things. We'll have all sorts of demos on everything from, artists' work to, heritage preservation, new age machining. It'll be a great event. So, if this is the sort of thing you're interested in, definitely take a look at the website, real2015.com. There's going to be a lot of good stuff there. So we'd like to encourage everybody to consider that if you have the option. And then with that, let's jump into some questions. I saw some good questions coming in. One that I think you mentioned, George, but I know that this is an important one for a lot of people, so we'll go back over it just in case. So the accuracy, how accurate is this method? Can we trust this? Is this survey grade, etc.?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We've actually done some, well, actually we didn't do the testing. Some of our customers have done the testing. So it's not the software company doing the testing on survey accuracy, although we have. They have done some testing comparing traditional, total station closed loop survey to laser scanning to photogrammetry or models from photo, point cloud from photo of a drone in this case, and they were closing within 0.06 accuracy to the traditional survey. Now, when you take that to this conversation, really we're not comparing this to traditional survey, because if we were, this process actually wins by a lot. With a traditional survey, we're really only taking a handful of shots on that stockpile in very precarious locations, and then we're taking those individual handful of shots back and creating a surface from that. And of course, if we're only basing our analysis off of, let's say 50 known locations versus, in this case, 400,000 known locations, then our accuracy, of course, in the photo, ReCap 360 process is going to be much more accurate. But what I found is if I were to compare a ReCap 360 project, like a photo-based project, to a laser scan project in this environment, a stockpile, you're getting about 2 to 5% reduction in accuracy. But I will say this, that's using a GoPro, and if you use a higher resolution camera, then your accuracy is much, much better. But 2 to 5% loss compared to a laser scan is pretty amazing, in my opinion.
All right. I saw a couple of questions. I can grab this one. People are asking if they need ReCap Pro to be able to import these point clouds. With ReCap Pro is our scan-to-scan registration capabilities as well as survey control. Unless you're tying your stockpiles into a survey plane, you shouldn't need Pro to do this workflow. The free version of ReCap should suit you just fine. That said, you will need the Pro entitlement for ReCap 360, which is currently being offered for $55 a year plus 5 cloud credits per full resolution rendering. So in order to unlock the ability to turn photos into a point cloud, you will need that Pro entitlement for ReCap 360. You won't need ReCap Pro on the desktop specifically to work with those. So that's kind of an important distinction there. We have a question about how many photos do you need to really get good coverage? For instance, this individual says that she has stockpiles that are 30 to 50 feet high. What would you recommend for making sure that that's captured accurately?
Yeah. So, and if they're 30 feet high, then the process that I described today could absolutely work, because you can just take that pole, walk up the hill a bit, and make sure that you get coverage with the photos at the top of the hill. That's really the biggest issue. As far as the number of photos is concerned, it's a hard answer to give, because it's less about the number of photos than it is about the overlap between the photos. So kind of a good rule of thumb I've found is to take a picture, if you can envision every 10 to 15 degrees around the object. So if you're taking pictures of a stockpile, I typically go about 30, maybe even 40 pictures, but I've done stockpile point clouds with only 20 as well. Again, it just depends on the coverage of those photos and how much overlap you have. Now, I will say this, I used the process today. I described a process not using a drone, but that is absolutely what I would recommend. If you can use a drone with a GoPro strapped to it, then you are absolutely ahead of the game. Delaware DOT, I know, is experimenting and using a drone, as well as others, many other of our customers. I will say this, I would recommend that you seek official legal counsel on whether or not you are able to use a drone for commercial use. But if you are, then the drone is the way to go.
Yeah, and I will say, as far as number of photos, so ReCap 360, certainly the more photos you input, the better. We support up to 250 source images at this time. We're working to, greatly increase that limit, in coming versions. But yeah, 250 is where we max out currently. But yeah, you can never go wrong with having too many photos. So that's an important one too. We have a few questions about, you talked a little bit about the cameras and which you prefer and everything. So we have a couple of questions regarding that. Can I get these kind of results if I use, my iPhone? What if I have another camera? Things like that. Feel free to chime in, George. But in general, as George said, the better the camera available to you, the better your results. So, if even the example of flying a drone, if you have a drone that has a GoPro attached to it versus a larger drone that's carrying a full DSLR rig, you're going to get better results from the DSLR rig. Bigger sensor, better sensor, more points available for the reconstruction, better resulting quality. Certainly, cell phone cameras, can be great. That's certainly one of those. Your mileage may vary. If that's your only option, give it a shot. We've had some great photo models come out of cell phone cameras. I wouldn't necessarily trust that if you're looking to turn this into a production workflow. But if you're out someday and you see an object that you'd really like to capture, pull out your phone, go for it. And
let me just
sure.
add to that one last comment, Eric, is that I'm not sure, I can't see who's asking the questions, but depending on who asks, my answer may be a little different. What I absolutely stand by everything Eric just said about the phones. Typically, that kind of a question comes from municipality. So if you were not a municipality and you asked that question, I apologize. But the reason being is that their staff has, cell phones in the field on site, and they don't want to go through the effort of purchasing additional equipment. Which is absolutely a fair concern. I will say this, that if you've got staff on site all the time and you like this workflow and you think that it can work for whatever it is you do, first of all, if you don't think it can work, please talk to me. I'd be happy to work with you. If you do, then honestly, it probably makes sense to just buy a GoPro and let them keep it in the truck charged up so that they have it on site. It's definitely worth the investment of a couple $100 instead of having them try to do it with their phone.
Yeah, definitely. And I will also say, on the subject of, photos and cameras, because we do get this question a lot. George mentioned some of the wide angle lenses, the fisheye lenses. We do have, when he said about support for the GoPro as, the Hero 3 Plus, Black Edition, that's because cameras like that have, the images come out really distorted. So they have a real pronounced, fisheye effect. So we actually have to do some correction on the software side to be able to use those effectively. So we're adding support for new cameras all the time. But if you hear us say this is what we support, that's probably why we're saying that. So for instance, with some of the drones like the DJI, the Phantom with the Vision camera, with DJI's camera, we don't natively support that camera. You would have to try something on your own, like they have an Adobe lens profile that
Yeah.
will auto correct those images, and so some of those images, you may not be able to just simply upload them to the service and get a good result. For cases like that where it's a distorted lens like a fisheye or a wide angle, you may have to take that additional step. Otherwise, for most, we call them normal lenses, minimal amount of distortion and all that, we automatically take care of that. Same way with, as I said, those supported GoPro models. But yeah, so I mean, we definitely recommend experimenting with this stuff. We can present workflows to you, but your mileage may vary. Maybe you'll find something that works even better, for your usages. So we definitely encourage you to get out there and, to play with this, to try it, send us feedback. We're always looking to make things better. And I think, with that, we should probably start to wrap this up. As you can see here, where to find us. So if you want to find out more information about ReCap, check out recap.autodesk.com. That's our microsite. You can find all sorts of, product comparisons and examples and all of that. You'll see a few of our, social channels. You can follow us on Twitter or Google Plus. As I mentioned at the beginning, we'll be posting the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel soon. And certainly we have the ReCap forum if you need any help. And again, feel free to reach out to us at recap.community@autodesk.com. Feedback is always appreciated. So with that, thank you, George. Thank you, everybody, for attending. If you go to recapproduct.com, you can see we have a whole section devoted to our upcoming webinars. You can find other interesting topics that we're going to be presenting in the coming weeks. So thanks for sharing your hour with us. Thank you, George, for your presentation, and I hope we'll see you all again.
You're welcome. Thank you all.